Welcome to Mirrors into Windows, a podcast by Global Teaching Partners, an official Bridge USA designated organization. I'm Amy Corwin.
And I'm Dante Johnson. Together we dive into education from every angle, transforming reflections into opportunities and uncovering strategies that would help us look beyond the classroom walls.
Our goal is to connect educators from around the world, bringing you conversations, insights, and stories that will shift perspectives and ignite meaningful change. Because when mirrors become windows, the possibilities are endless.
Whether you're navigating life as an international teacher or searching for new ways to enhance your practice, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration, collaboration, and a richer understanding of the global classroom. So let's start with getting a foundational understanding, right, of when we talk about cultural backgrounds and talking about shared values and norms and traditions that shape how people think, communicate, and behave, right? So in the classroom, these cultural influences shape everything, right? So like how students perceive authority to how they approach learning and interact with each other. And it just brings me back to, thinking about what students come from as far as their home life. So like one, there are some students that lack the adult authority presence in the home, right? So that's something to consider. And then two, like sometimes the teacher is the first person of their origin that those students are interacting with, right? So to kind of make sense of that, put that in context.
They bring a lot into the classroom.
Right. And then Amy, you mentioned in a previous episode about living in Ireland and having little to no diversity, right, in your community. And the reality is, even here in the U.S., there are pockets of communities that have very little diversity. And so when I think about my own experience teaching students that have never had interaction with an African-American male, right? So that was something they had to overcome. That was something that we had to learn through. And I felt like, that was a space in which they were able to kind of learn. And as well as for me, it was a learning experience for me too. So understanding the cultural differences and how students behave is key to creating that inclusive environment, right? So we had to create an inclusive environment for the teacher as well as for the students. And often, teachers encounter behaviors that seem disruptive and inattentive, right? But just understanding that these are different ways in which cultures interact and looking at it from a cultural lens is important. And we sometimes discover that they're simply just expressions of that culture and trying to understand that in ways to communicate.
That's so good that sometimes you kind of, what you think of as normal classroom behavior that can vary widely across different cultures. I know our teachers really struggle with that because adjusting to these norms can take time. And if you do adjust, it kind of helps to avoid some misunderstandings that may be happening in your classroom and really just creates that respectful space for students. Let me give you an example. Like in some countries that, we bring teachers from, like the Philippines or kind of many African countries, students are expected to stand when speaking to the teacher or when somebody enters the room. While in other cultures, that's not really common practice at all. Or another example could be like eye contact. In Western contexts, making eye contact shows a lot of confidence, right? You're going to go after what you want and you're going to be intentional about what you get. But in some cultures, avoiding eye contact with authority figures is what is considered a form of respect. Something like avoiding eye contact could be misinterpreted here as lack of interest or disrespect for the teacher. But if you don't know the cultural context, that's what it's going to come across as. And so understanding some of the differences that happen across cultures will really help prevent that misinterpretation of behavior, which might actually be signs of respect, or rather than just simply noting it as disengagement.
Right, exactly right. And I think we have to be mindful of the unconscious cultural biases that we have, that we carry, right? And there's been so many, you all know I love research, and there's been a lot of research on this, like just talking about how this is a human condition, like we carry that with us. And so I can't help but to think back on a previous episode we talked about the iceberg, that 10% at the top and picking out one of those characteristics you might see in someone and saying, oh, this person must be like this because of their characteristics. And it all circles back to past experiences you've had with others that had those same characteristics. So we just carry those, naturally we carry those implicit biases. And sometimes it can lead us to view differences as shortcomings.
Yes.
And we have to really be intentional about looking at things, different beliefs, different ways of different practices as just differences, right? And like your way is not just the correct way, right? So recognizing the biases and approaching the differences, simply as an alternative perspective of life, rather than a problem or a fault of someone else.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And so it is something we coach our teachers on when they're coming here, to not just assume everything is going to look and feel exactly the way that they know or that they're used to. One area that we notice a lot of our international teachers who come to the U.S., they struggle. They ask a lot of questions about how American students kind of participate in learning. And this can be a really surprising shift for them. In many Western cultures, independence, self-advocacy, they're strongly encouraged skills in our students. And so if a student has a question, wants to ask something or challenge an idea, they're often expected to speak up. Don't hold back.
Right.
Say what you want.
Right.
And, back to what you said at the beginning, the parents are coaching them to do that because they brought that from home. And so many of our teachers really come from backgrounds where that is not the cultural norm. That is not the norm in the classroom. Students are more reserved in class. Places like Jamaica or the Philippines, they're less inclined to kind of speak out or actively engage in kind of group discussions. And so it's a shock because here in the U.S., the classroom's highly interactive. Students are encouraged to ask questions, are encouraged to work in groups, and they're really told to kind of take the lead and go explore those ideas. And so it can feel very unusual at first. Sometimes our teachers resist a little and summarize it as bad behavior. That's how they categorize it. But it really doesn't always mean that the students are trying to be disruptive or challenge authority. Rather, this level of engagement is a cultural norm in an American classroom. And so it kind of reflects the emphasis on active participation as part of the learning process.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it kind of takes me back to a story I heard from one of the teachers, one of our teachers who moved here from the Philippines. And she was, initially expecting, like you said, her American students to kind of just, sit and listen and learn.
Ma'am.
And yes,
listen.
Exactly. And so the approach to learning was she expected her students to be more reflective and be more reserved with their learning, like they do in the Philippines. Well, an awakening happened. So she was really taken back by her students not hesitating to jump into discussions. Sharing their opinions freely. She said even like debating on some topics that they had going on in class, and she was really taken back by that. And she learned that, that U.S. students in the U.S. in the classroom, they're often encouraged, like you said, Amy, at a young age to express their ideas openly and have group discussions where they're able to share their ideas and express themselves.
It's really fascinating how much context can really matter. I myself had a student once who would kind of speak over others in class, and I mean, it's your gut reaction. You initially think he is just going out of his way to be disruptive, and my reaction is frustration, right? I wanted to discipline him for kind of speaking out of turn, if you will, but later I kind of realized this student had been brought up to speak up and share his opinion, and he'd never been told that it could be considered rude to do that, especially in front of the authority of the teacher. And so in his mind, he thought it was actually a way to show me he was really engaged in the lesson, and he was really actively participating and doing his best job. And so once I learned that, the best thing that I was able to do was sort of set up some classroom norms to help balance those speaking turns. But I just didn't necessarily take it as a behavior as a sign of disrespect any longer. I kind of put some new expectations in place, and I got them to think about, turn taking a little bit, but we were able to adjust and adapt, which was really cool. So Dante, tell me, how did the Filipino teacher adapt to this new style that she wasn't used to?
It's similar to you. I mean, she had to kind of learn to incorporate, more open-ended discussion questions in the class, having small group activities in the class, which allowed the students to engage, and especially when you have energetic students, and they have hands-on type of learning in the classroom was helpful. She sat back and observed, and she was reflective, and she made adjustments based on what she noticed. Because, coming in, she didn't want to let go of all of her tools and strategies she had for teaching. So she was being creative and finding ways to blend it, like her teaching approach with the ways the students are learning in the classroom. You had to kind of make a nice little blend so it can work on both ends, and it's just helping her to feel more connected to the students.
Yeah.
It was more effective for the students and for her teaching in the classroom.
Look at her turning a mirror into a window.
Exactly.
What a great example of adapting.
Yeah.
It really highlights that our cultural lens can sometimes create those unintended barriers. But when we sort of recognize that the norms might be influencing our students' behaviors, it generally helps us to respond more effectively and create an environment where all students can succeed. And so it's truly helpful to keep that growth mindset about this. It does take time. It takes an openness to learn about these differences. Some great ways to start are by observing and talking with students and their families. Back to that relationship piece, ask questions about their traditions, see what cultural norms they're bringing into the classroom from home, and see how you then can find that balance in your classroom to set up something that works effectively for you and your students. The best thing you can do is just avoid assumptions based solely on those initial impressions that you have of your students.
Yeah. So now that we discussed how cultural differences in the classroom influences the student behavior, I think it's good for us to look at practical strategies, right, for adapting with teaching. We kind of talked about some examples in the last section, but I think it's good to kind of name some that teachers can take away and utilize. So things like group activities, project-based learning, student-led discussions are common practices here that we see, and they, as essential tools for student learning.
Yeah, exactly. If you're coming from a background where lecture-based teaching is prevalent, we kind of call that the chalk and talk type teaching, like in Jamaica. It is more common, as many of our teachers are doing that type of practice in their home countries. When they get here, the shift towards kind of active student participation can feel like a really big adjustment. The classroom environment becomes louder or more energetic than they've ever been used to before. And so you do start to feel a little like you're spiraling in the U.S. This interaction and the noise, here can be seen as a really positive thing. If you are a U.S. teacher, you will see that as a sign of engagement. You don't think that that's a distraction because they're talking about the work. Students have the expectation where they're supposed to discuss their ideas and debate their viewpoints and even challenge each other. And then the teacher kind of facilitates that as part of the learning process. And so if that's an alien style to you, you might need to think about sort of some ways that you can adapt your practice to kind of fit in here in the U.S. And so trying to incorporate more of that collaborative work. An example of how you could do that is sort of breaking the students into pairs, into small groups to kind of explore a concept together. I've seen it work in English language arts lessons. Instead of just standing at the front and sort of leading the discussion yourself, you might set up a think, pair, share type activity. Where the students first reflect individually, then discuss their thoughts with a turn and talk type partner, and then maybe finally share out to the whole class. This approach really allows students to learn from one another, which is highly valued, and they definitely feel like they are part of and involved in the learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there's some hesitation that comes with that on the teacher part, just
how do you manage the noise?
Yeah, exactly. So the noise level, just focus of the students, especially as they get in middle and high school, right? But there are ways in which you can have them working group work, and you become more the facilitator in that space. I think that thinking back on some examples, you have the fishbowl discussion strategy that you can use, or the Socratic seminar for older students. That those are examples of ways in which students can work in groups, and it's productive, right? So it's productive discussion, and it's important for you to kind of model what that looks like, remind them, of how that could be run, but then also giving roles. Like, I love giving roles: a note taker, you have a spokesperson, you have a timekeeper. So every student in each group has a responsibility, and it's better for managing with those things. I think I'm thinking back, like, I've been visiting some schools recently, and I noticed that teachers were reiterating the expectations around group work. And I'm like, and these are high school students, right? High school classrooms. And I'm like, yes, keep doing that, because I feel like that is also a learning strategy for the students to kind of work together in a organized and facilitated way to help them have productive discussions.
And if you're setting those clear expectations and then giving feedback, you will be setting them up for success. And sometimes tools like rubrics can really help highlight those specific goals, or sort of where are they heading with this activity? Where is this group work going? So they have a clear vision. Feedback is vital. You can kind of do one-on-one feedback, or if that seems like a little challenging to fit in your schedule, you can try leveraging some peer feedback, especially if you model that first. You could get your students to give a go. And so teaching your students how to give some constructive feedback to one another not only lightens your load, of course, as a teacher, but it builds those valuable communication skills, which will set you up for sort of that successful collaborative working space.
Yeah. I think along with that, just looking at discipline as a whole in the classroom, like, it could be totally different here, right? So, like, most of the U.S. classrooms, we're looking at positive praise for students when we see them doing positive things, right? So, and that could be different from where you come from. Like, if you're coming from another country, it could be a different way in which you're modeling or working in your classroom with classroom discipline. For example, like, instead of calling out students when they're off task, you're praising the students who are doing the right thing, right? Who are following the instructions. And science tells us, science shares with us, I love the science, that, when we are doing something and we receive good results, then something in our brain tells us to continue to do that, so you can continue to get those results that you like. So naturally, this type of discipline style in a classroom is for helps a lot of teachers and students to kind of make sure they connect, and it's a way for students to learn the positive behaviors.
That's right. It's called positive reinforcement.
There
and
you
it
go.
can feel very different if you're used to a more strict or a more directive approach, or you've come from a culture where punishment is kind of the first course of action over positive reinforcement. And so you might want to try creating a reward system. Or some simple verbal acknowledgments, like, I love how this group is working together respectfully. Like, it might feel very small to start with, but this kind of recognition really encourages students to just model the behaviors you want to see without creating a real punitive kind of atmosphere.
So it also works when you have energetic, challenging students. We all have, we all come across that, but just making sure that there are logical consequences. That's a huge word, I feel, and that's a word that is helpful. They gotta see the follow through. They have to see the follow through, and it's helpful to have discussions with your students about consequences, right? So one thing that I used to go to is like in the classroom as a teacher is when students are handling materials, misusing materials, and there might be a mess or different things like that. The logical consequence after that is for them to clean it up.
Yeah.
So the whatever's going on, the consequence matches or is logical. But I think it's also important to talk about their consequences, whether they're consequences that work for you that you like, or there might be consequences that you just want to stay away from them.
Yeah.
Right? But either way, you're going to have a consequence. So essentially, consequences, teaching your students, it's a natural outcome of your actions.
And so they really can see the beginning and the end of the whole process,
Absolutely,
which is what students need in their minds to really maximize their potential. So another aspect of the U.S. classroom that might be unfamiliar if you're coming from another place is there is a strong emphasis on choice, autonomy over work. We said it like 3 times. We're in the land of independence over here. So you might see teachers giving students a lot of options in how they demonstrate their learning. Like, are they doing it visually, audially? Like, they might have a book to read or a project topic, but then they get to decide on the presentation format. Are they doing a video recording? Are they doing an audio recording? Are they writing something down or a poster? This flexibility can feel very unusual if you're coming from a background where the assignments are a lot more standardized. Everybody does the same thing. It doesn't matter. But it's intended to make the learning process a little more personalized, and it definitely makes it just a little bit more engaging. And so we have some advice, some ideas if you're interested in experimenting with some choice. You don't have to start big. You can start with small options. Like if you have good relationships with your students, you might allow them to kind of choose their own seat for particular group works or projects. Or you might just have 2 assignment topics or choices that they can pick one or the other that kind of meets the standard or the topic that you're covering. And so by doing this or these small things, you will give the students a sense of ownership over their learning, which often increases their engagement, and it will ultimately increase their motivation because they feel like they have some choice or say in the work that they completed. As you become more comfortable with that concept, you might introduce some more open-ended choices where the students can maybe explore their own interests while still meeting the learning goals.
So I think that is very important. It just helps manage behavior much better when you give students choices.
Well, how much do you like to choose whether you're going to have this thing today or this thing?
It's a natural thing. It's a natural thing that
even when it comes to dinner choices.
I'm telling you, it really does help make things the students become more cooperative, right? And so I think that it's not it's a matter of, and it doesn't mean it has to be out of control, right? Like you can give them, choose one of these 2 options, right? And that's the structure that you can have in your classroom. It just brings me back, you talked about a rubric earlier, Amy. I was just really impressed by one of the teachers I saw recently from the Philippines, and he had binders. It was a middle school classroom, I think 6th grade. Binders for each student, and they had a cover sheet in the very front with 5 assignments that they had to complete for that week. And the assignments were listed there, and they got to choose when and how they wanted to complete their assignments. And the students would log in when they finished their assignments, also had rubrics of what the expectations for the assignments were. And he said that it had really opened up opportunities for the students to really grow. Not only just in the content and what they were learning, but also how they felt about themselves. They have more confidence in themselves. And so, when we talk about being empowered, that's exactly what they felt.
Wow, that's such a great strategy. That's a tricky age, and when they're really trying to discover themselves and find out who they are, look at that kind of steps to independence, where the students are really getting a good choice about what they do and how they complete their work.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that helps a lot of teachers too to kind of adapt and go into this space where they feel more comfortable is, seeing what other teachers are doing,
Yeah.
right? We ask teachers, say, hey, go observe other teachers, especially if they're teachers that have been teaching in the U.S. for a while. See what techniques they're using in their classroom, because each teacher has their own unique style, right? And so looking at different things that they do that you feel like is a value that you could utilize in your teaching space is so important. So, don't be afraid to ask questions is a big one. Like, ask for advice. Most teachers are very happy to give strategies and share ideas and things that they use in their classrooms when it comes to teaching and connecting with their students.
Honestly, this was one of the best learning experiences for me personally as I transitioned to teach in the U.S. I was working in a school with over 94% minority enrollment and about approximately 62% free and reduced lunch. And so I had little or no experience at all handling many of the behaviors that I was seeing in the classroom. Also, as I mentioned last week, most of the class did not look like me, and so I was doing a really terrible job of trying to relate to my students, and I just was finding building relationships with them so tough. I had a lot of my own mindset. It was just, I was very stuck in, well, they should be doing it my way, or the things that I brought into this classroom, why are they not aligning with me or coming on board with what I'm asking of them to do? I just culturally, I felt so different. And so basically the classroom was spiraling out of control, and so my principal walked in and kind of released me from my classroom for 2 full days. She sent me out. She gave me a list of people who she knew was doing it well in the building, and so she sent me to observe. And so I just got to spend 2 whole days going from classroom to classroom and making observations of the local teachers, how they were handling their behaviors, how they were managing their transitions, how they were delivering their lessons, and setting those realistic expectations that would be understood by the students. And it was transformational. It was just one of the best experiences I've had. My eyes were sort of opened. And so I just really feel like every new educator should do that, regardless of whether you're international or not. I'll just put that little plug in that every principal should let their teachers get out and learn the culture of the school by doing that. I know that's not always possible, but it really just afforded me that great opportunity to see how it was done, ask questions, and things improved after that because I had more context and understanding of what I needed to do. And I came back and I realized that my way was not the only way. And I really stripped it back and started to learn again from the ground up.
Yeah, I love that. True success story. I just appreciate you being open-minded to learn and receive. Like, that's major. And then I imagine, too, like, you receiving all that you've learned, you just took steps, right? To build and small steps. You take those strategies and you just add them into your toolkit, gradually, and you be able to pull them out and utilize them when you're ready, but it's a gradual effect. It's a process that you go through with that. So I love that.
Yeah, adapting takes time. It's not something that can happen quickly. You have to be patient with yourself. You are your own harshest critic. We are designed and wired to feel like we are failing when things feel like they are beyond our control. But that's what makes gritty educators, and that's what our students need. They need people who are in it, and in it to keep making it better. Okay, so remember, the goal is not to just change who you are as a teacher, but to expand the range of the strategies that you use to sort of meet your students where they are. You're bringing something unique to the classroom, Don't forget that part. But as you adjust, you're creating an enriched experience for your students and yourself. I think we should talk a little bit now about how we build an inclusive classroom environment through that cultural awareness piece. How do you make it that it's inclusive for students from a variety of backgrounds.
Yeah.
As an international teacher, I know you bring a unique and valuable perspective.
Yeah.
But you can use that to kind of model cross-cultural understanding within your classroom. In fact, your background is one of your greatest assets. It really enables you to bridge the different cultural experiences and create a learning environment that is welcoming, respectful to all, because you have that added advantage of some firsthand experience, right?
Absolutely. And so this is my jam right here, meaning
I knew this would get you excited.
Yeah, I'm so passionate about this. Yeah. I mean, truly am. So because, and it's so true what you said, like one way to begin building that inclusivity in the classroom, right, is to share your culture with the students. And we talked about that in previous episodes. It's funny because I just had this conversation with the teacher the other day, and I was talking about how, we see you more than just as a chemistry teacher, right? Like you are a person that you're an individual that just so happened to be from Zambia, and then you also teach chemistry. So there's more to you than just you being a chemistry teacher. And your students also need to see that. Like they see you in the classroom, but then to understand that there's more to you as an individual, as a person. So you sharing your culture with your students, it only builds that connection and makes them feel more comfortable about their own.
Yeah, and it's so nice to be able to weave those little moments into your classroom because, school is pressurized. There's a lot to do. You have targets to make and goals to make and tests and assessments. And so those little culture moments, it allows students to see that they can share a little piece of their heart and their culture too. And so we encourage our teachers to recognize some of those traditions that are important to them in their classrooms. It's an exciting way for students to learn about different parts of the world while also helping them to see you, like you just mentioned, as a unique individual with rich experiences, bringing a lot to the table. You're not just the chemistry teacher.
Right.
So we ask our teachers to put visuals in the classrooms, artifacts, or even like playing some traditional music from your country to kind of make your culture feel real and tangible for the students. Being from Ireland, Americans sure do love St. Patrick's Day, and Irish music is always very upbeat, very lively. And so living here in America, I was always the teacher who was the token of St. Patrick's Day. So much so that my principal always made me do the morning announcements on St. Patrick's Day in my best Irish accent.
I love it.
And it was just so funny because it was that platform to kind of connect with the kids, and everybody wanted to show me they were wearing green on St. Patrick's Day because I was the teacher from Ireland, and other teachers can do that too, and you just bring that little piece of warmth into the classroom that really develops that relationship piece. You can consider hosting a day in the life presentation where you share what an ordinary day looks like for kids in your home country, or even just bring in items like traditional clothing, small souvenirs. Not only is this really engaging, but it gives students a first-hand look at global diversity. In today's technologically driven world, it's really easy to set up a Zoom call, allow students to have authentic conversations with kids across the world. It's a really meaningful way for them to try to learn.
I like that idea. Essentially, it's almost kind of like a project, right? Like a cultural showcase that they could do. I love that. And it kind of puts me in mind, I don't know if you remember Show and Tell.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
That's what it's like.
Like students can bring in objects from home that tells a story of, that represents their culture, or even create a Where I'm From poem. I love those. And it just gives the students time and space to connect with their identity. And sometimes students won't tap into that until they're given that opportunity. And so opening up that opportunity in the classroom, especially for our students that come from immigrant and bilingual households. Like they might not have representation in the classroom of their culture, so you allow them to bring that in.
That is not a lost art. Kids love to talk about themselves. They love to share about their background, but you have to open the door for that. Like you said, they might not have the confidence to do that on their own, but that's the unique piece of our international teachers. They can open the gateway for that
Absolutely.
very easily. And beyond special projects, another strategy to sort of build that inclusivity is to be intentional about including those diverse materials and perspectives in your day-to-day lessons. Really put some thought into your reading selections, the examples that you use. You can really think about those historical or cultural figures that you highlight. For example, like if you're teaching about significant scientists or artists or leaders, don't just stick to the one culture. Like include figures from various backgrounds and regions. And this small shift will help those students that you mentioned feel very represented in the classroom. It teaches them that the different cultures have really contributed to the world in lots of different meaningful ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think representation is very important. I think that's what it really boils down to in some instances, just the understanding that the materials that you're given, like the curriculum that you're given, might not be as diverse as you would like it, right? And understanding that you have other materials and resources that you can find to insert into what you're doing to still fulfill that curriculum and those standards that you're teaching. However, you're giving it more of a broader look, right, for different cultures. Because as we know, different cultures celebrate different things, but they also think differently, right? We talked about that before too. So making sure that you're offering a variety, like books. We can always circle back to books, right? Books, websites, multimedia content, all those things kind of give a variety of ways in which you can share voices of others and help students to learn. And having visuals in the classrooms is another one. Posters. As soon as I step into a classroom, I teach classes, I'm looking at the walls, right? If these walls could talk, and so having different posters and maps, inspirational quotes. I love when some of our Jamaican teachers have inspirational quotes on the board every day for their students, like affirmations. And it's that right there speaks to the students so deeply, even if they're not Jamaican, but still they're able to see that culture and the words that they use and how they actually circle back and connect with their culture, their American culture, or whatever culture they come from.
It reminds me of one of the schools that we work with. It's a school that is a global ready school, so they are really passionate about this work. And so you say visuals are really important. They have giant posters in their school all around the hallways of different children from around the world.
I love it.
Visual representations of kind of kids from everywhere. And it's really powerful as you walk around the school because many of our students don't get to meet or interact. And they're lovely reminders that the world is different. It looks different. The children look different. But we're all united in one world kind of learning and growing together. And so I do think representation is really important. And, ultimately creating an inclusive environment goes beyond just celebrating cultural diversity. It's about setting those clear values from the beginning around respect, empathy, open-mindedness, and you as the educator have the power to do that. So like as you introduce your classroom expectations at the very start of the year, that is your opportunity to share your personal values with your students. You have an opportunity to explain that everyone's perspective is valuable, and you can emphasize the importance of listening, respecting differences, that we're not all going to think alike all of the time, and just to keep that open mind always. And so this sets the tone, it sets the foundation where students feel safe. Ultimately to be themselves, empower them to speak up and share their thoughts. If they know that you respect their opinion, then they're going to be open to sharing it and giving you that information.
That is so important. And just to remember that we all carry our biases.
We do. You already said that before.
It is so important to circle back to.
It's really important,
So because we have that and we might have different behaviors in the classroom, as educators, and this is all of us, whether you're an international teacher or you're here teaching in the U.S., from the U.S., taking a step back and looking and just observing and just thinking through like, okay, these behaviors might be disruptive. However, but what does this mean about the background of the student, right? And what things could we do? What learning can we participate in to kind of learn of different ways in which we can work with the student with behaviors that we call or deem disruptive or inappropriate? Because what it might, if it's it might be appropriate in one culture, but inappropriate in another. So I think having those conversations with students is so helpful, and it helps you to build a stronger connection with your students.
Yeah, and you cannot do that without putting in the work.
Right.
You've got to put
Right.
the work in to get to know your students
Right.
and individuals too. We laugh, but simple things like learning to pronounce their names correctly. I will never forget getting my class roster at the start of the year and thinking, wow, I've never seen like half the names that are on here.
Yeah.
So like a big part of like your first weeks of work is
Yeah.
just making something out of it to really authentically get to know who they are.
Yes.
Because it's important. Showing interest in their hobbies, you know.
That's a big one.
I am not a sports fan. I don't know sports at all, but you know, fourth grade boys love some basketball and some football. American football, as I call it, because
That's right.
I don't even know the rules of that sport. But you know, Google taught me how to do it and how to play it, and so that I could know the names of some players and the names of some teams, because it's important to them, and it goes an awful long way in helping them feel seen.
I love it.
And help them feel respected.
Yeah.
Because the teacher knows about XYZ.
Yeah.
It's how you build relationships with them. It's amazing how your students will respond to you when they know that you genuinely care about them.
Yeah.
You're invested in them.
Right.
And not just their education,
Right.
them as a person, who they are.
Absolutely. That is so important. I love that you're learning your students, and that's what we do as teachers. We learn about things so we can connect with our students.
Correct.
Like we talk about, it's all that learning process. And then to also avoid making assumptions. So looking at students and saying, okay, if a student is quiet, right, for an example, that we assume, sometimes we can assume that the student, there's a lack of interest there, right? We talked earlier about the eye contact. We can make assumptions there as being disrespectful, different things like that. But to consider that, you know, they could be adjusting, right, with some of the differences, the language and the culture, and a quick private check-in with those students, kind of like when you learn more about the students and have those check-in with those students, can make them feel supported and give you insight on what things you can do to help their experience as they get more acclimated into the community.
Yeah, we talked a lot about our teachers coming and having to adapt and adjust, but always take a moment to consider that your students have as much to adjust to as well, coming into your classroom, learning your rules, your expectations, especially if they're bringing some of their own cultures or norms from home into the classroom. Every year is like a brand new blank canvas where they have to learn. And so don't be afraid to adjust some of your classroom activities to accommodate different cultural comfort zones. Like if you see that your students may be more accustomed to group work and discussions while others might prefer more individual tasks, you are free to plan for that in a way that provides balance, offering a variety of activities that allow for both everybody to feel kind of comfortable. Collaborative learning projects, independent learning. It doesn't have to be all one or all of the other.
Yeah.
This way you're not forcing students completely out of their comfort zones because you're providing some things that are comfortable to them, but you provide multiple ways for them to engage with you, which shows that you are doing your best to try to understand them.
I love that. That's a great strategy. I think one other one we could kind of talk about is like accepting feedback, being open to feedback from your students.
Sometimes teachers are afraid of that because they're not really sure where that's going to go, but you should be open to trying it.
Absolutely, and actually it happens regardless if you're open to it or not.
Yes, because they're pretty honest and they're going to tell you what they think, right?
And you'll be able to see it in the way they learn. Like if they're not connecting with you, you won't be able to see as much growth in their learning as you would if they were connected. So you can also take that as feedback, but also just be open, inviting them to share feedback with
Yeah.
you. Like something simple like a suggestion box could work. I talked about in the previous episode how we used to have morning meetings and students would talk, and I would sit back and just kind of listen. So all those things are very helpful, because in the end, what it does is it just really creates an inclusive classroom. And that is, I told you, that's big for me. Like, it really just helps students to connect to the culture of the classroom. You create your own culture with many different cultures coming together in the classroom.
Yeah, I really think we've got a theme going here where if you stay curious, you stay flexible, and you stay open-minded, you're going to probably be the best type of educator, because you will create that classroom culture where your students can really thrive.
Yeah.
So don't forget that building an inclusive environment is a journey. It's not something that's going to happen quickly. It's going to be slow, steady steps where you're learning about your students. They learn from you, not just about subjects, but about how to respect, to celebrate, embrace diversity. And so try to enjoy that process. Try to enjoy discovering sort of new educational landscapes and ways of thinking together, because as you adapt, your students will benefit from that global perspective that you bring. And that really is truly something that is invaluable.
Here we go again, the segment of the podcast where we take a moment to ask candid questions to our educators. This is where we get up close and personal with our amazing international teachers, asking them fun, lighthearted, heartwarming questions that will give us a glimpse into their unique cultural backgrounds and teaching journeys. So let's dive in to see what makes these teaching journeys truly special. Amy, tell us what question we have today.
Well, Dante, we've talked a lot about managing behaviors and strategies for that, and I think for every good teacher, it's at the top of their list to have some nice things in place. So we asked the question, what are some of the most creative ways you've handled those more difficult behaviors in your classroom? And we got back some really awesome answers. One of our teachers, a third-year teacher from Ghana in Africa, he had this to share. He said, back home in Ghana, we have a deep cultural value of hard work and earning rewards. Whether it's in the community or in school, there's always this sense of pride when we put in the effort to get something special in return. And so he came up with this idea of giving golden tickets. He wanted something that felt meaningful, not just a small token, but something that symbolized their hard work, their kindness, and kind of going that extra mile. And so he created this kind of reward system in class where golden tickets are given to students who show exceptional effort, whether they're kind of helping a classmate solve a difficult problem, showing real leadership, completing their assignments on time. And so he just felt like it was a tangible way that he could acknowledge those moments in real time, and all of the other students can kind of visualize it as well. And so he actually brought a unique kind of cultural thing into it. He sort of turned it into like a currency of the class, if you will. He was able to have some fun conversations with his students about money in Ghana versus money here. And so the more tickets they earned, the more they were able to kind of use their tickets to buy little trinkets or things that they had. He brought in a little pile of things for them to purchase. And so it just created like a nice little community of like classroom award. And I think he did a really awesome job of just making sure every student got recognized for something. He didn't just narrow it into the work. He didn't narrow it into just what they were doing kind of classwork wise. He brought in character traits too.
That's good.
So he was able to reward for the kindness he was seeing, the effort he was seeing. And honestly, that was really a trend through all the answers we got. And we had another teacher in Honduras talked about a compliment chain where she made it an intentional effort to just compliment her students and encourage them to every day, one person finding a reason to compliment another student. Again, nurturing a really great environment of respect and mutual understanding for one another. And she just was able to kind of bring that tradition into the class.
I love it.
It showed me that it's simple, right? Just pick one little small thing, and you can really just make those positive impacts in a really big way in the classroom. Thanks for listening to Mirrors into Windows. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. It helps us reach more educators just like you.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and any other social media platforms, or visit our website at globalteachingpartners.com. Until next time, I'm Dante Johnson.
And I'm Amy Corwin.